We've seen how Cosimo built something that was impossible to break down, and we're going to see how he actually did it, because the mechanics and the maneuvering and the strategy here are maybe even crazier than what you were taught in history class. Now, at its peak, the Medici Bank was arguably the most important financial institution in all of Europe. It handled currency exchange, royal loans, and trade financing across multiple kingdoms and cities simultaneously. It also operated through a kind of like early holding company infrastructure, like a central partnership in Florence that owned stakes in these different branches all across the continent. And that's something that, normal corporations would do today, but the Medici family really helped pioneer it in a world that had never seen banking or any type of, intercontinental business at that scale ever. But that doesn't even come close to what they were able to accomplish. Beyond people's finances and their worldly treasures sits something deeper, right? That there's something more valuable than the riches of the world, and that is their faith. And that's exactly what the Medici family was going for next, the Catholic Church. Even starting in Giovanni's era and deepening significantly under Cosimo, the Medici Bank became the main banker of the papacy, which means that they weren't just lending money to the church, they were collecting fees, donations, and taxes from Catholics across a lot of Europe on the church's behalf, and then routing that money back to Rome. So think about that for a second. Every time money moved through the Catholic Church, the institution that told you how to live, how much to tithe, what's moral, who's going to heaven, who's going to hell, it was very often going through the Medici hands as an escrow or kind of an intermediary. That's not like a normal banking relationship. Now, here's what's wild about this. The church had an official position that charging interest on loans is a sin. In Catholic dogma, this is called usury, and it's morally condemned publicly and by the same institution that the Medicis were now banking for. So, how did the Medici family charge interest? Well, they hid it. Specifically, they buried it inside of foreign currency exchange transaction, basically bills of exchange. You maybe have heard of forex trading. This is kind of like the early version of this. You borrow money in one currency and you repay it in another. And the exchange rate, conveniently, has the interest already built into it. So technically, there's no interest ever getting charged. There's no fee that you see. On paper, it was just an exchange. Like, we got money in, France's currency, and all of a sudden, we changed it to Italian currency. But in reality, the Medici were collecting interest from clients, including, at the times, the church itself. They were charging the most powerful moral authority in the world for a service that authority itself had declared sinful, and doing it with the church's own blessing, kind of, because the church needed them too much to really look closely to, scrutinize the math. It seems like the church has kind of looked the other way because it was so useful. And the leverage that this created was staggering. In the 1400s, if you were a king or a duke and the Pope decided that you weren't legit, like he would basically be like, this duke is not real, he's excommunicated, like he's done, you had a massive problem. This is the ongoing tension between church and state. The church's approval isn't just spiritual. At the time, it is the political currency. And the institution that is basically approving who's legit and who's not is financially entangled with the Medici family. I mean, at that point, you didn't even have to threaten anyone. You didn't have to say a word. The web and the connections and relationships were just there, and everyone that was on the inside just kind of understood how it worked. And then the Medici family would take it again one step further. Over the course of the family's history, they produced 4 Catholic popes. Yeah, 4. Leo X, Clement VII, Pius IV, and Leo XI. The most famous of those, of course, is Leo X. This is Lorenzo de' Medici's own son. Lorenzo had secured him a cardinal's appointment when he was just a teenager. So, just to trace the arc here, Giovanni builds the bank. Cosimo makes the bank a part of the Catholic Church, really ingrains it. And eventually the family put one of their own sons in the Pope's chair. Literally puts one of their own kids on the throne of the Catholic Church that basically runs all of Europe, especially Italy. And they didn't just influence the church, they were running it from the inside and the outside. So the bank itself actually collapses in 1494, about 2 years after Lorenzo dies, largely because his successors weren't actually careful enough with it, right? It's a classic story. But by then, the job was kind of already done. The wealth it generated and the relationships that they built and the institution that it had created, all the access that was built up, It had already given the Medici family something that money can't buy, a real sense of legacy and permanence that is really unbreakable. And speaking of Lorenzo, that's exactly where we're going to go next, because everything that we talked about so far, the banking, political maneuvering, the church relationships, Lorenzo inherited all of it. Can we actually get a picture of Lorenzo? I would love to see this guy. And then he added something that none of his predecessors had ever thought of, to scale their power to insane new heights. Lorenzo bought the future through art. Like literally that. When people say like, oh, art is just for these poor artists, like it's, it might not have, it is so culturally significant, especially in this time. It runs the symbols and the visual apparatus to understanding who's in charge. And he's about to run the entire cultural imagination of Western civilization. Lorenzo de' Medici took over in 1469 at just 20 years old. And there he is. A little older than 20 there. He's probably 35. Nice head of hair. The middle part's a little crazy though. Did you get a word on if Lord Farquhar was inspired?
Lord Farquhar is not officially based on Lorenzo de' Medici, but rather his visual design has been compared to portraits of the Renaissance figure.
By podcasters and comedians over here at Camp Gagnon.
Sure.
Now, Lorenzo doesn't have like the royal title or, the princely position. Nothing official, right? Just like his predecessors. Just the name and the network and everything that, Cosimo and Giovanni basically built. And he ran with it. Where Giovanni was staying quiet and Cosimo was staying useful and, building it up, Lorenzo was completely front and center. Not politically loud necessarily, but culturally, he was everywhere. He understood that the next frontier of Medici power was, it wasn't more money. It's not more loans. It's not more banking stuff. It was reputation. It's legacy. The kind of influence that outlasts like the bank balance or the number in your bank account. So he starts to fund the people who inspire the future. I mean, this is something that goes on to this very day. Like if you went to college and you saw your library, it probably has some guy's name on there. And that guy didn't do it because, he loves reading. He did it because he goes, I'm going to be there forever. I mean, imagine the Harvard Library. Who's that named after? Because that's after some very wealthy person that was like, you guys are all going to remember me. Every person that walks through these halls and my kids and my great-grandkids, they'll be able to say, my daddy built that. So, I mean, for example, did you find it?
Yeah. The main Harvard Library, Harry Elkins Widener Memorial Library, is named after Harry Elkins Widener, a Harvard College graduate, an avid book collector.
And an avid book collector.
And he died in the sinking of the Titanic.
No, did he really?
Yeah.
Wow. What an interesting ripple.
Yeah.
What was his business? What did he do?
He was just an avid book collector.
Stop it.
And his mother donated the funds for the library as a memorial to her son.
Well, that's nice. Well, how did the family get the money?
I'll dig in.
Yeah, this is a sidebar completely, but I'm so curious. Now, let's get back to the Medicis, all right? Lorenzo, he funds an artist, this young guy named Michelangelo. You see, he moved into the Medici palace as a teenager, and he ate dinner with the family. Lorenzo spotted him young and recognized what was essentially one of the greatest artists of a generation and said, hey, great news, you live here now. Leonardo da Vinci moved in circles deeply shaped by Medici patronage. Botticelli was closely tied to the family, as well as Raphael, a generation later, who would work for a Medici pope in Rome. Every artist that Lorenzo funded or drew into his orbit was making Florence more famous and more prestigious and more of a destination for the wealthiest and most powerful people in all of Europe to come visit or to do business or to live. Scholars were going there. Foreign rulers sent their children there to be educated. The city became the symbol of civilization itself. This isn't even in the realm of philanthropy anymore, but this is branding really at a scale that most modern institutions can't even really grasp. But Lorenzo was also a genuine intellectual, not just a sponsor. He himself would write poetry. He hosted gatherings of philosophers at his villa with the sharpest minds of his time. The Renaissance as a movement had multiple contributors, but a significant portion of it ran through Lorenzo's world. He wasn't just watching history happen. He wasn't there when the Renaissance was going on. He was actively a part of creating the Renaissance. So by the late 1470s, Lorenzo was one of, if not the most prominent political figure in all of Italy, managing relationships with foreign states and dignitaries, keeping Florence out of wars, balancing allies across the region that were constantly threatening to, destroy each other or collapse into conflict. Now, the thing with the Medicis at this point is that they had been cooking for a few generations. And for the longest time, they were kind of the big dogs in charge. But they weren't the only ones in the neighborhood. You see, the Pazzi family were one of Florence's other major banking dynasties. They were actually the family that managed to take the papal banking contract away from the Medici family for a period, which, if you've been paying attention, you know that this is about as direct of a challenge as you could make. The Pazzi and their allies, including Pope Sixtus IV, had reason to really want the Medicis to go away. The Pope had his own political ambitions in central Italy that Lorenzo kept blocking, and the tension had been building for years. What they decided to do about it is one of the most audacious things that ever happened in the entirety of the Renaissance. It might even be worth its own episode, but we're going to discuss it right now. It happened on Easter Sunday, April 26, 1478. Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano are at Mass inside of the Florence Cathedral, the Duomo, surrounded by people of the city. I mean, you can see the structure here, and on the inside, it's unbelievably beautiful. Now, unbeknownst to these two brothers, mixed into that crowd on Easter Sunday are assassins. The plan was to kill both the brothers at exactly the same time, then seize the government before Florence ever has time to react. The signal was the elevation of the host. This is truly the holiest moment in all of the Catholic Mass, where the priest lifts up the Eucharist and everyone recognizes the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. This is the moment when literally transubstantiation happens, where the body of Christ is imbued with the Spirit of Christ and transforms into the body. I mean, I'm kind of nerding out on Catholic theology here, but it's so important and so ritualistic. If you've ever been to a Catholic Mass, that is the moment. Now, in that exact moment, the signal is given. Giuliano is stabbed 19 times. He dies bleeding out on the floor of the cathedral. Lorenzo is wounded in the neck, but his friends and people around him actually get him into the sacristy and they barricade the door. He survives. And then everything went wrong for the Pazzi. They had assumed Florence would rise up against the Medicis and, once the brothers were gone, everyone would say, oh, they're gone, good riddance. Instead, the city closed ranks around Lorenzo immediately. The Pazzi had completely misread the room. Decades of Medici goodwill and building projects going all the way back to Giovanni's tax reforms and these beautiful libraries and churches, they had made the family genuinely popular with just the ordinary people of Florence. And wildly enough, the retaliation was swift and brutal. Francesco de' Pazzi, one of the main conspirators, was hung from the windows of the Palazzo dello Signoria. This is one of the most significant buildings. You can see it still to this day. But it wasn't just him. The Archbishop of Pisa, who had been a part of this plot, was also killed. Dozens of conspirators and co-conspirators were executed in total. The Pazzi family name was legally erased from Florence. Their coat of arms chiseled off of buildings. Everything that they had ever done, their whole legacy, the properties that they owned were all seized. Their symbols were taken out of public view. Surviving family members were just basically forced to change their names and leave Florence and live in exile. Now, here's the craziest irony of the whole thing. The conspiracy made Lorenzo more powerful. Think about that. Any question about whether Florence truly supported the Medicis was answered in the days after the attack. Now, once again, I don't want to get too modern politics here, but this reminds me of when a presidential candidate was speaking in Butler, Pennsylvania, and survived an assassination attack, and for that week was heralded as almost like a divine figure. That man is Donald Trump. If you remember that moment, he stands up, blood coming down his face, putting his fist in the air. The American people, in my opinion, were gathered around. They were like, wow, this guy is it was a transcendent moment. And I mean, regardless of what you think about the guy, in that moment, I think the election was kind of won. And this is not the first time it happened. It happened hundreds of years before with Lorenzo. Now, Lorenzo ruled for another 14 years. He kept building, kept funding, kept maneuvering, and he died in 1492 at just 43 years old. And what he left behind was a family that had started as rural farmers that became bankers, that built one of the largest financial institutions in all of Europe, embedded themselves in the church, survived exile, survived assassination, and shaped the entire cultural output of civilization. They never had a crown, they never had an official royal title, and they never were trying to get it either. But the story here is not over, because after Lorenzo, the Medici family did something that even they couldn't even conceived of, and that was finally becoming actual royalty.